"You're sleeping with me now," the mountain man declared to the labor girl he bought at auction. In a town where dust fills the streets and cruel men sell the weak like cattle, a silent mountain giant throws down a single silver coin. He doesn't buy the girl for sin, he buys her for freedom. But when the church bell tolls and the gossip spreads, the whole town turns against them. She thought she'd escaped the lash, but her past carries a deadly secret, her stolen inheritance. A fortune in land and water that greedy men would kill to keep. He thought he'd only given her a roof, but he's about to risk his life, his faith, and his soul. As flames rise, rifles are drawn, and the law itself twists against them. Will mercy or vengeance decide their fate? And when the truth comes out in the church before the whole town, will this mountain man and the girl he swore to protect find justice or be buried by the past forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter February wind cut through Anna Mae's thin cotton dress as she stumbled onto the wooden auction block, her arms wrapped tight around herself, fingers blue with cold. But the shivering came more from fear than frost. The overseer's iron grip on her arm would leave bruises, she knew, like the others that marked her pale skin. Samuel Briggs yanked her forward, his voice carrying across the muddy town square of Elk Creek. "Stand up straight, girl. Show these fine folks what they're bidding on." Anna's legs trembled beneath her. The faces below swam in her vision. Men with hard eyes and cruel smiles. Women who turned away or whispered behind gloved hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The auctioneer, a weaselly man in a threadbare suit, cleared his throat. Next up for sale, labor contract for debt. Young woman, 19 years, healthy and skilled in domestic work. He flourished a stack of papers. Legal documentation of outstanding debts, inherited from her late father, looking to start bidding at $5. Anna's eyes burned with unshed tears. Those papers were lies, every one of them forged by Briggs after Papa died. But who would believe a penniless girl over a respected mine overseer? The crowd shifted restlessly. A few half-hearted bids were called out. $2. $3. But even the roughest men seemed uncomfortable with this public selling of a white girl's labor. $3 going once. The auctioneer called, his voice echoing off the false-fronted buildings. That's when heavy boots thudded on the packed earth, and the crowd parted like water around a stone. Anna looked up through her tangled hair to see a mountain of a man approaching. His dark beard was shot through with gray, and a jagged scar crossed his right hand. But it was his eyes that held her. Deep-set and intense, they blazed with something that might have been anger or might have been justice. Without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a silver dollar. The coin gleamed as he set it firmly on the auction block. The sound of it settling against the wood rang out like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "Jedediah Harper," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd. Anna had heard tales of the solitary trapper who lived high in the mountains, appearing in town only to trade furs and vanishing again like smoke. Briggs sneered. $1? The girl's worth more than that in back wages alone. That dollar's worth more than your whole crooked operation. Jed's voice was low but carried clear across the square. And you know it. A few men shuffled their feet. Others looked away. They all knew about Briggs's schemes, but none had dared speak against him before. "Well now," a drunk miner called out with an ugly laugh. "What's old Jed want? With a pretty young thing? Getting lonely up in them mountains?" Jed's shoulders tensed. When he spoke, his words cracked like thunder. "You're sleeping with me now." Gasps and shocked mutters erupted from the crowd. Women clutched their shawls tighter, and men's hands drifted toward gun belts. But Jed wasn't finished. "Under my roof," he continued, each word deliberate and clear. "Fed at my fire, free of the overseer's lash, his eyes locked onto Briggs, and protected by my rifle, should anyone think different." Anna's breath caught in her throat. This stranger was offering her shelter without shame, protection without price. After months of Briggs's protection that came with cruel hands and crueler words, the difference struck her like sunrise after endless night. Briggs's face had gone purple with rage. "Now see here." But Jed was already moving, his scarred hand gentle as he helped Anna down from the block. Her legs nearly gave out, and he steadied her with a touch that held nothing but respect. "Can you ride?" he asked softly. Anna nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd grown up on a farm. Papa had taught her to ride before she could walk. "Then we'll take Moses." Jed gestured to where a large brown mule stood patiently at the hitching post. He's sure-footed in the snow. The crowd parted again as they walked toward the animal. Some men glared, hands still hovering near weapons. Others looked ashamed, as if Jed's actions had held up a mirror to their own cowardice. The women's expressions were mixed, some scandalized, some secretly approving. "This ain't legal," Briggs shouted after them. "That contract ain't worth the paper it's written on," Jed finished without turning around. "Just like every other contract you've forged." He helped Anna mount the mule, making sure she was steady before picking up Moses's lead rope. The last rays of sun were painting the snow-capped peaks gold as they started down the muddy street. Anna looked back once at the town that had trapped her for so long. Briggs stood rigid with fury, his fists clenched, but he didn't move to stop them. No one did. The wind was picking up, driving clouds across the darkening sky. Anna pulled her thin shawl tighter, trying not to shiver. Without a word, Jed shrugged out of his heavy coat and handed it up to her. The wool was warm from his body, and it smelled of pine smoke and leather. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning far more than just the coat. Jed nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Storm's coming. Best we make good time." They traveled in silence as dusk gathered around them. The only sounds were Moses's steady hoofbeats and the wind sighing through the pines. Anna's mind whirled with questions, but she held them back. This strange, gruff man had just saved her from a fate worse than death. She wouldn't risk his kindness with too many words. The town disappeared behind them as they climbed higher into the mountains. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, and Moses picked his way carefully along the trail. Anna found herself swaying with the mule's rhythm, exhaustion seeping into her bones now that the immediate danger had passed. "Another hour to the cabin," Jed said, glancing back at her. "You holding up?" "Yes, sir," Anna replied automatically, then caught herself. He wasn't Briggs, demanding constant assurance of her submission. "I mean, I'm fine. Just tired." "Reckon you would be." His voice held no judgment, only understanding. Been a long day. That simple acknowledgement of her ordeal nearly broke her. Anna blinked hard, refusing to cry. She was safe now, safer than she'd been since Papa died. This mountain man might be a stranger, but he'd shown more decency in one afternoon than she'd seen in months. The shadows lengthened as they climbed higher. Snow began to fall in lazy spirals, catching in Jed's beard and settling on Moses's ears. The mule plodded on, steam rising from his flanks. Anna could feel the temperature dropping as night approached, but Jed's coat kept her warm. She studied his broad back as he walked ahead, wondering what had driven him to intervene. Most men in town had been content to look away, to pretend they didn't see Briggs's cruelty. But this solitary trapper had stepped forward with a single silver dollar and changed everything. The trail switched back on itself, climbing steeper now. Through gaps in the trees, Anna caught glimpses of the valley below, Elk Creek already lost in the gathering darkness. Each step took her further from captivity, from the overseer's greedy hands and the townspeople's judging eyes. Her chains lay abandoned on that auction block, and she was riding toward something new, something that might, just might, be the beginning of hope. The mountain trail wound higher through stands of towering pines, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Moses, the sturdy mule, picked his way carefully along the path, his hooves crunching through frozen crust. Anna pulled Jed's coat tighter around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth against the deepening chill of dusk. Jagged peaks loomed above them, their snow-capped summits bleeding into steel-gray clouds. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke, so different from the stale air of town. Anna's legs ached from riding, but she wouldn't complain. Each step took her further from Briggs and his cruel hands. She studied Jed's broad back as he walked ahead of Moses, leading them up the mountainside. His stride never faltered, even as the path grew steeper. Why had this stranger stepped forward to help her? The town would talk. They always did. Yet he'd placed that silver dollar down without hesitation, claiming her freedom with quiet authority. The silence between them stretched on, broken only by Moses's steady breathing and the whisper of wind through the trees. Anna's mind spun with questions, but she held her tongue. Experience had taught her that men's kindness often came with hidden prices. Just as the last light began fading from the sky, Jed paused at a bend in the trail. "There," he said, pointing ahead. "Home." Anna leaned forward, peering through the gathering gloom. A small cabin nestled against the mountainside, its log walls weathered gray with age. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and lamplight gleamed through a single window. Pine trees crowded close, their branches forming a protective circle around the clearing. "It ain't much," Jed said quietly, "but it's warm and dry." The cabin looked like a fortress compared to the cramped room where Briggs had kept her. Anna's throat tightened as they approached. What expectations would this mountain man have? What new chains awaited her? Moses stopped before the cabin's door, and Jed helped Anna dismount. Her legs trembled beneath her, stiff from the long ride. He steadied her with that same careful touch he'd used at the auction block, then led Moses to a small lean-to stable at the cabin's side. "Wait inside," he said, pressing a key into her palm. "Get warm." Anna's fingers closed around the rough iron key. When was the last time someone had trusted her with anything of value? She unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. Warmth enveloped her immediately. Blessed warmth from a pot-bellied stove that glowed with banked coals. A lamp burned on a rough-hewn table, its light revealing a single room kept neat as any parlor. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a pot of something savory simmered on the stove. A narrow bed stood in one corner, its quilt carefully smoothed. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and provisions. Everything had its place, speaking of a man who valued order. The floor had been swept, the windows sealed against drafts with careful caulking. The door opened behind her, and Anna flinched instinctively, but Jed merely stamped snow from his boots before entering, carrying her small bundle of possessions from Moses's saddle. "Stew's been simmering since morning," he said, moving to the stove. "You must be hungry." As if in answer, Anna's stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since the previous day, when Briggs had thrown her a crust of bread. She watched warily as Jed ladled thick stew into 2 tin bowls. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. When she hesitated, he added softly, "Please." Anna perched on the edge of a wooden chair, her back straight as a rail. Jed set a bowl before her, along with a spoon and a thick slice of bread. He took the seat across from her, but made no move to eat. "This is your home now," he said, his deep voice gentle. "For as long as you choose to stay, you'll work alongside me, cooking, cleaning, mending, but as my equal, not my property." He met her gaze steadily. "You're not a slave here, Anna May. You're free." Tears sprang to her eyes at his words. She blinked them back, not daring to believe. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help a stranger?" Jed's scarred hand rested on the table between them. "A man ought not let cruelty stand," he said simply. "Not if he wants to face himself in the mirror come morning." The truth in his voice undid her. Anna lifted a trembling spoon to her lips, and the first taste of rich stew nearly broke her composure. Venison, potatoes, and carrots filled her mouth with flavor she'd almost forgotten existed. Tears slid down her cheeks as she ate slowly, savoring each bite. Jed ate his own portion in silence, his movements unhurried. When Anna had finished, he rose to bank the fire for the night. "The bed's yours," he said, unrolling a blanket before the stove. "I'll sleep here." Anna stared at him, waiting for the moment when his true nature would reveal itself, but he simply arranged his makeshift bed and began removing his boots. "There's a washing basin behind the screen," he continued, nodding toward a corner of the cabin. "Clean water in the pitcher. Take what you need." She slipped behind the screen, finding a ceramic basin and pitcher as promised. The water was cool and sweet as she washed her face and hands. A small mirror hung on the wall, and Anna caught a glimpse of herself. Thin face, dark circles under her eyes, hair tangled from the wind. She looked like a ghost of the girl she'd been before Papa died. When she emerged, Jed had already settled onto his blanket, his back turned to give her privacy. The lamp burned low, casting soft shadows across the cabin's walls. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, and snow whispered against the windows. Anna approached the bed cautiously. The quilt was clean, smelling faintly of cedar and sunshine. She sat on the edge, still wearing Jed's coat over her thin dress. "You're safe here." Jed's quiet voice came from his place by the fire. "No one will harm you. Sleep well, Anna May. She slipped beneath the quilt, her body gradually relaxing as warmth surrounded her. For the first time in months, there were no chains binding her wrists, no locked door preventing escape. Just a warm bed, a full belly, and a stranger's unexpected kindness. The wind's voice changed, becoming a lonely howl among the pines. But inside the cabin, the fire's glow held back the darkness. Anna's eyes grew heavy, as exhaustion claimed her. Her last thought before sleep took her was a prayer, not of desperation as she'd grown used to, but of cautious gratitude. For the first time since Papa's death, hope flickered in her heart like a candle's flame, small but steady against the night. Dawn crept over the mountain in pale streaks, painting frost patterns on the cabin's single window. Anna woke to the sound of a spoon scraping against iron and the rich scent of cooking oats. Her muscles ached from yesterday's long ride, but the bed's warmth made her hesitate to rise. Jed stood at the stove, his broad shoulders blocking most of the morning light. He stirred a pot with careful attention, as if cooking porridge required the same focus as splitting logs. Steam rose in lazy curls around him, carrying the promise of cinnamon. Anna sat up slowly, uncertain of her place in this strange new world. Should she hurry to take over the cooking? Was she meant to serve him, as she'd served Briggs? The overseer had demanded complete subservience, punishing any hint of independence. Before she could decide, Jed turned and noticed her watching. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. He filled 2 wooden bowls with steaming porridge, setting them on the table alongside a jar of honey. "Eat while it's hot." Anna slipped from beneath the quilts, straightening her wrinkled dress as best she could. She hesitated beside the table, fingers twisting in her skirts. "Sit," Jed said firmly, gesturing to the chair she'd used the night before. It wasn't a request. She perched on the edge of the seat, watching as he spooned honey into both bowls. The porridge was thick and creamy, nothing like the watery gruel Briggs had thrown at her. When Jed began eating without ceremony, Anna picked up her own spoon. The first bite nearly overwhelmed her. Warmth spread through her chest, and the honey's sweetness brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "There's more in the pot," Jed said quietly, pretending not to notice her emotion. "Eat your fill." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. When the bowls were empty, Jed rose and pulled on his heavy coat. "Time you learned the day's work," he said. "Bundle up. It's cold out there." Anna wrapped herself in the coat he'd given her yesterday, following him into the crisp morning air. Their breath fogged in the early light, as Jed led her around the cabin's perimeter. "Water comes from the spring," he explained, pointing to a clear stream that bubbled from rocks nearby. "We'll need 4 buckets full each morning, 2 for drinking, 2 for washing." He demonstrated how to break ice from the stream's edge without muddying the salmon. Water. Anna's arms trembled as she carried her first bucket back to the cabin. Water slopped over her boots, freezing instantly in the cold. But Jed didn't comment on her clumsiness, simply showing her where to pour it into the cabin's water barrel. Next came the wood pile. Jed handed her an axe, showing her how to stand safely, how to let the tool's weight do the work. "Mind your fingers," he warned. "Wood's harder to split when it's this cold." The axe felt awkward in Anna's hands. Her first few swings barely dented the log, and her palms began to blister. But she gritted her teeth, determined to prove her worth. When Jed noticed her raw hands, he disappeared into the cabin, returning with clean rags. "Here," he said, carefully binding her palms. "Should have done this first. My fault." His rough fingers were gentle as he tied the cloth. "These'll toughen up in time." They moved on to Moses's care, the old mule greeting them with a soft whicker. Jed showed Anna how much hay to provide, how to check the water trough for ice, how to curry the mule's thick winter coat. Moses leaned into her brushstrokes, clearly enjoying the attention. As morning stretched toward noon, they gathered kindling from the woods surrounding the cabin. Anna found herself sharing fragments of her story, the words spilling out like water from a cracked jar. "Papa owned good land," she said softly, breaking dead branches into manageable lengths. "Not much, but it was ours. We had a little house, some chickens. He taught me everything: cooking, sewing, keeping accounts." She swallowed hard. "Then the fever took him, so sudden. Before I could even arrange the burial, Overseer Briggs appeared with papers claiming Papa owed him money. Jed's hands stilled on the kindling he was gathering. "What kind of papers?" "Loans," he said. "But Papa never borrowed from anyone. He was too proud for that." The papers looked official, though, with fancy writing and red seals. Anna's voice cracked. Briggs said, "I could work off the debt or go to jail. I didn't know what else to do." "May I ask what your father's name was?" Jed's tone was carefully neutral. "Thomas May," Anna whispered. "He came west after the war, wanted to start fresh." Jed frowned, his scarred hand tightening on a branch until it snapped. "I remember that writing style," he said slowly. "Saw it years back, when Briggs tried similar tricks with mining claims. Fancy flourishes on the capital letters, distinctive way of making his numbers." Anna's heart began to pound. "You mean, you've seen him do this before?" "Man like that leaves a trail," Jed said grimly. "But he's careful, moves on before folks catch on. Always has friends in high places." He sighed heavily. "I tried to prove what he was doing back then, but he'd covered his tracks too well." They worked in silence for a while, the weight of shared knowledge hanging between them. As they carried the kindling back to the cabin, fat snowflakes began drifting down from heavy clouds. The short winter day was already fading when they finished the outside chores. Inside the cabin, Jed built up the fire while Anna mixed cornbread batter, following his simple instructions. The familiar task soothed her, reminded her of better days in her father's kitchen. They ate their supper by lamplight, the cornbread still warm from the oven. Snow fell harder outside, wind whistling through the pine branches. Anna found herself watching the window nervously, imagining Briggs's face appearing in the darkness. "He'll come looking for me," she said suddenly, voicing the fear that had haunted her all day, "when he finds out where I've gone." "Let him come," Jed said quietly. His scarred hand rested on the table between them, steady as a mountain. "You're safe here, Anna May. I give you my word on that." The conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Still, as she lay in bed that night, listening to the snow blanket, the woods, old terrors crept close. The overseer's face leered in her memory, his threats echoing in her mind. But the cabin was warm, the quilts heavy and clean. Jed's steady breathing came from his place by the fire, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. Anna's lips moved in a prayer she thought she'd forgotten, one her father had taught her long ago. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered into the darkness. "I shall not want." The ancient words carried her into sleep, while outside, snow continued to fall, erasing all traces of the path that had led her to this mountain sanctuary. The snow fell steadily through the night, transforming the mountain landscape into a pristine white blanket. Anna woke to find frost patterns decorating the inside of the cabin's window, delicate as lace. The familiar sounds of Jed stoking the fire and preparing breakfast filled the small space. Their second day together settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. The morning chores seemed easier now, despite the deepening snow. Anna's hands, though still tender, worked more surely with the axe. She found satisfaction in the clean split of wood, in the neat stack growing against the cabin wall. "You're getting the hang of it," Jed observed, his gruff voice holding a note of approval. The creek required extra attention, ice forming faster in the bitter cold. They worked together to keep a channel open, taking turns breaking through the frozen crust. The sound of running water beneath the ice reminded Anna of wind chimes. Inside the cabin, away from the biting wind, they found peaceful tasks. Jed brought out a pile of worn harness straps that needed mending. Anna's nimble fingers proved skilled at working the tough leather, while Jed's stronger hands managed the heavier repairs. "My father taught me to sew," Anna said softly as she worked. Said a careful stitch would last longer than a hasty one. The memory brought a smile instead of tears this time. As evening approached, Jed reached for his Bible, worn smooth by years of handling. The leather cover was cracked but carefully mended, the pages dog-eared with use. He settled into his chair by the fire, the lamplight catching the silver in his beard. "Would you read?" he asked, holding the Bible out to her. "My eyes ain't what they used to be in this light." Anna accepted the book carefully, finding comfort in its familiar weight. Her voice grew stronger as she read, the ancient words filling the cabin with peace. Jed listened intently, his rough hands still on his knee. Later, while putting away her few belongings, Anna discovered her father's old hymnal tucked at the bottom of her bundle. The sight of his careful handwriting on the flyleaf made her heart catch. "What's that you've got?" Jed asked, noticing her pause. "Papa's hymnal," she answered, running her fingers over the worn cover. He marked his favorite songs with little crosses. Jed's interest was immediate. "Might we try one?" Anna opened to a familiar page and began to sing softly. After a moment, Jed attempted to join in, his deep voice stumbling over the unfamiliar melody. His earnest effort, so at odds with his usual sure manner, startled a laugh from Anna, bright and unexpected as sunlight. The sound of her own laughter shocked her into silence. How long had it been since she'd felt such simple joy? Jed's eyes crinkled at the corners, though he tried to look stern. "Reckon I need more practice," he said, rubbing his scarred hand across his beard. The peaceful moment shattered on the third day with the sound of hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Jed was instantly alert, moving to the window with the quiet efficiency of a hunter. Anna felt her heart begin to race, fear rising like bile in her throat. But it was only Will Turner, their nearest neighbor from 5 miles down the mountain. His horse was lathered despite the cold, suggesting hard riding. Jed met him at the door. "What brings you out in this weather, Will?" Turner's face was grave beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Trouble in town, Jed. That overseer, Briggs, he's filed charges against you. Claims you stole his property." His eyes flicked to Anna, standing frozen in the cabin's doorway. "He's got papers saying the girl's bound to him for debt. Sheriff's taking it serious." Anna's hands began to tremble so badly, she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. "Property." The word echoed in her head like a death knell. "Word is there might be a warrant coming," Turner continued. "Thought you ought to know." Jed's expression hardened, but his voice remained steady. "Much obliged for the warning, Will. You'll stay for coffee?" Turner shook his head. "Best be getting back. Storm's coming in harder." He gathered his reins, then paused. "Watch yourself, Jed. Briggs has friends in high places." They watched until Turner disappeared into the swirling snow. Inside the cabin, Anna paced like a trapped animal, her skirts swishing against the rough floor. "They'll hang you," she burst out. "Helping me. They'll call it theft. I won't have your death on my conscience." "Sit down," Jed said firmly. When she continued pacing, he stepped into her path. "Anna May, sit." She dropped into a chair, hands twisting in her lap. Jed moved around the cabin with purpose, checking his rifle and gathering supplies into a saddlebag. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said, sliding the cleaned rifle into its scabbard. "Need to know exactly what we're facing." "We?" Anna's voice cracked. "There shouldn't be any we. I should leave tonight, disappear into the mountains. You can tell them I ran away, that you tried to stop me." "No." The single word held the weight of stone. "But you're under my roof now," Jed said, turning to face her. "That's final. I won't have you risking your life for me." Anna stood, fists clenched at her sides. "I'm not worth." "Don't." Jed's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't you dare say you're not worth protecting. The Lord himself says otherwise, and I reckon he knows better than Briggs." Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks. "You don't understand. Briggs, he'll destroy anyone who stands in his way. I've seen it." "Ain't the first snake I've faced," Jed said grimly. "Now, help me get supper ready. We both need to eat." They worked together in silence, the familiar tasks of preparing the meal offering little comfort now. Anna's hands shook as she stirred the stew, causing the spoon to clatter against the pot's iron sides. Jed said nothing, simply steadied the pot when it threatened to tip. The stew was rich with dried beef and winter vegetables from Jed's root cellar, but Anna could barely swallow past the lump in her throat. She watched Jed eat methodically, his face thoughtful as he planned tomorrow's journey. The fire popped and hissed, throwing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows in bitter swirls. Anna thought of Briggs in his fine house in town, plotting their downfall over brandy and cigars. The food turned to ashes in her mouth. "Try to eat a bit more," Jed encouraged, pushing the bread closer to her bowl. "Tomorrow will take care of itself." But they both knew tomorrow's dangers were already gathering, like storm clouds on the horizon. Anna forced down another spoonful of stew, praying her presence wouldn't prove to be Jed's destruction. The evening stretched long, neither of them ready for sleep despite their weariness. Jed checked his rifle again, then began gathering supplies he'd need for the ride to town. Anna watched him work, her heart heavy with the knowledge that every preparation was necessary because of her. Finally, exhaustion drove them to their respective beds, Anna to the narrow cot, Jed to his blanket roll by the fire. But sleep proved elusive as the wind moaned through the pine branches, carrying with it the weight of tomorrow's uncertainties. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pale gold as Jed and Anna guided the mule down the mountain path toward Elk Creek. Frost sparkled on their coats and formed delicate patterns on the mule's mane. Anna's breath came out in white puffs as she held tight to the saddle horn, trying to still her trembling hands. The town emerged from the morning mist like a painting coming into focus. Smoke rose straight from chimneys in the crisp air, and the telegraph office's windows glowed with early lamplight. As they passed the first buildings, heads turned and conversations stopped. Women drew their children closer, and men paused in their work to stare. "Keep your head high," Jed murmured, leading the mule down the main street. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." But the whispers followed them like shadows. Anna caught fragments that made her cheeks burn. Bought her right off the block. Living alone up there. Scandal. They dismounted outside the block, sheriff's office, the wooden steps creaking under their boots. Inside, Sheriff Matthews looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing with concern. The office smelled of coffee and wood smoke, wanted posters rustling on the walls in the draft from the door. "Figured you'd be coming," Matthews said, gesturing to the chairs before his desk. His badge caught the morning light as he shifted papers around. "Got yourself in a mess here, Jed." "Reckon I need to hear exactly what kind of mess," Jed replied, settling into a chair. Anna perched on the edge of the other seat, her back straight as a fence post. The sheriff pulled out several documents, laying them on the desk with careful hands. "Overseer Briggs filed formal charges yesterday. Claims Miss Anna May here is his property by right of indenture for unpaid debts. Says you interfered with his legal property rights when you took her at auction." Anna's face went pale as fresh snow. "But the debts weren't real," she whispered. "He forged." Matthews held up a hand. "That's a serious accusation, miss. Would need proof to back it up." He turned back to Jed, his expression grave. "Way the law stands, interfering with property rights is a hanging offense. Briggs has influence with the circuit judge." The word hanging seemed to echo in the small office. Anna felt the room spin slightly, gripping the arms of her chair to stay upright. The thought of Jed swinging from a rope because of her made her stomach heave. "How long do we have?" Jed's voice remained steady. "Circuit judge won't be through for 3 weeks," Matthews replied. "That's your window to find evidence, if there is any." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Watch yourself, Jed. Briggs plays rough when crossed." Jed nodded, rising from his chair. "Much obliged for the straight talk, Sheriff." Outside, the morning had warmed slightly, but the stairs that followed them down the street were colder than ever. Anna felt each hostile glance like a physical blow. Men who had bid for her at auction now looked away or spat in the dirt as they passed. The general store's bell jangled as they entered. Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, barely acknowledged their presence, her usual friendly greeting notably absent. As Jed gathered supplies, coffee, flour, ammunition, Anna moved toward the fabric section, needing thread to repair Jed's spare shirt. 2 women browsed nearby, their heads bent together in conversation. Their voices carried clearly in the quiet store. "Living in sin up there, plain as day. Nothing but his bed slave. Mark my words. Decent folk shouldn't have to see such." Heat flooded Anna's face. She turned to flee, but Jed's voice rang out, clear and strong across the store. "Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Blake," he said, naming the gossips. "Seems to me Christian women ought to be slower to judge and quicker to show kindness. Miss Anna May is under my protection, nothing more. She's a lady deserving of respect, and I won't hear different spoken in my presence." The store fell silent. "Mrs." Peterson dropped a tin can. The 2 women flushed red, gathering their skirts and hurrying out without making their purchases. Jed calmly continued counting out coins for their supplies as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Anna felt it in her heart, a small seed of dignity taking root. She straightened her shoulders and finished selecting her thread, ignoring the curious stares now directed their way. The ride back to the cabin seemed longer than the morning's journey. The mule plodded steadily upward as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Neither Jed nor Anna spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges ahead. Evening shadows were stretching across the yard when they finally reached home. Anna's muscles ached from the long ride as she helped Jed unload their supplies. The familiar sight of the cabin, with smoke curling from its chimney where they'd banked the morning's fire, brought unexpected comfort. Inside, they moved through their evening routine, storing purchases, preparing a simple supper, tending the fire. But tension hung in the air like smoke, until Anna couldn't hold back the words anymore. "I'm nothing but a burden to you," she burst out, hands trembling as she set bowls on the table. "Your very life is at risk because of me. I should never have—" "Stop right there." Jed's voice was firm but gentle. He set down the coffee pot and turned to face her. "You're no burden. You're a blessing, though you don't see it yet." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "A blessing? I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." "You've brought life back to this cabin," Jed countered. "Brought purpose to my days. The Lord didn't put us here to live easy. He put us here to do what's right." The wolf howled in the distance, its lonely cry echoing off the mountainsides. Another answered, then another, their voices weaving together in the gathering dusk. Anna moved to the window, watching darkness settle over the familiar yard. Strange, she thought, how this place had become home in such a short time. Despite the danger, despite the fear, she felt a sense of belonging here she hadn't known since her father died. The feeling was as fragile as a soap bubble, but it was real. Jed's quiet movements behind her, laying out supper, felt like an anchor in uncertain waters. His defense of her in town had shown her something she'd almost forgotten, that she was worthy of respect, of protection, of kindness. The wolves called again, closer now, their song a reminder of wild things and untamed places. Inside the cabin's warm circle of lamplight, Anna wiped her eyes and turned to help Jed with supper. Tomorrow's worries would keep until tomorrow. For now, there was food to share, prayers to say, and this fragile peace to hold close against the gathering night. The weather shifted like a merciful hand had swept the clouds away. Morning sunlight sparkled on crusty snow, and the bitter wind that had howled around the cabin eased into gentle breezes. Anna stood at the doorway, breathing in the crisp air while Jed checked his trap lines. "Time you learn to handle yourself proper," Jed announced over breakfast that third clear morning. He pushed aside his bowl and fixed Anna with a steady gaze. "Can't always be around to help. Mountains ain't forgiving to those who don't know their ways." Anna nodded, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. "I want to learn. I need to." They started with the basics. Jed showed her how to split kindling, demonstrating the proper angle to hold the hatchet. "Let the weight do the work," he instructed, guiding her hands. "No need to force it." Anna's first attempt sent wood chips flying everywhere. Her palms blistered, but she refused to quit. By midday, she had a decent pile of kindling and a proud smile despite her aching shoulders. Next came the snares. Jed's weathered hands moved with practiced ease, twisting wire into loops. "Rabbits are creatures of habit," he explained, setting a snare along a well-worn path through the snow. "They'll use the same trails, day after day. The trick is reading the signs." Anna studied the tiny tracks in the snow, learning to distinguish rabbit prints from squirrel, deer from elk. Her fingers fumbled with the wire at first, but Jed's patience never wavered. By the fourth snare, she managed a passable loop. "Not bad," Jed approved. "Might catch something with that one." The rifle lesson proved more challenging. Jed's old Winchester felt heavy and awkward in Anna's hands. He positioned her carefully, showing her how to brace the stock against her shoulder. "Breathe easy now," he instructed, setting up an empty can on a fence post. "Squeeze the trigger gentle, like you're testing hot coffee. Don't pull." The first shot went wide, making Anna jump at the noise. The second kicked hard enough to bruise her shoulder, but by the third, she managed to graze the can, sending it spinning. "There you go." Jed's praise warmed her more than the afternoon sundae. "Keep practicing. You'll be providing your own supper before long." Later, while Anna rubbed liniment into her sore muscles, she decided to sort through her small satchel of belongings. Most were practical items, a spare dress, her mother's thimble, her father's old hymnal. But tucked in the bottom, she found something unexpected. her father's leather-bound journal. "What's that you got there?" Jed asked, noticing her intent expression as she turned the pages. "Father's journal," Anna replied softly. "I'd almost forgotten." Her voice trailed off as she studied an entry, brow furrowed in concentration. Jed moved closer, peering over her shoulder at the neat handwriting. The page detailed mineral rights to a creek parcel near Elk Creek, complete with careful drawings of boundary markers. "Wait." Jed's voice sharpened with interest. He took the journal, reading more carefully. "Anna, do you know what this means?" She shook her head, confused by his sudden intensity. "This creek parcel, I know the spot. There's silver ore in those banks, rich veins by all accounts, though no one's worked it proper yet." He looked at her intently. "This could be why the overseer targeted your father's land. With these mineral rights, that property's worth a fortune." Anna's hands trembled as she took back the journal. "I remember the creek," she whispered. "Father used to take me there when I was small. We'd pan for sparkly rocks just for fun." "We should see it," Jed decided. "If there's ore visible, it strengthens your claim." They saddled up, Jed's mule carrying them both down the snowy trail. The journey took longer than usual with the deep snow, but eventually they reached the creek banks. Anna slid down first, walking slowly along the frozen water's edge. "Here," she said suddenly, touching a weather-worn post. "Father carved his initials here. See?" Her fingers traced the faint JM still visible in the wood. Jed examined the creek banks closely, brushing away snow in places. Glints of ore caught the afternoon light, promising richness beneath. "This is it, all right. Your father knew what he had here." Anna stood silent, memories washing over her. "We used to picnic right there." She pointed to a flat rock overlooking the creek. "Mother would pack cornbread and apple butter. Father would tell stories about the mountains." Her voice caught. Jed touched her shoulder gently, understanding in his eyes. The sun was setting by the time they returned to the cabin. Anna's cheeks were flushed with cold and excitement as she stoked the stove while Jed hung their snow-damp coats. "If we can prove the mineral rights are mine," she said, hope bubbling in her voice, "we could challenge the overseer's claims." "Steady now," Jed cautioned, though his eyes were kind. "We'll need more than the journal. Need to find proof the overseer forged those debt papers, but it's a start." Anna nodded, sobering but not discouraged. She pulled out her father's hymnal, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. "Would you like to learn one?" she offered shyly. "Father always said music lifts the spirit, no matter how heavy the heart." Jed hesitated, then nodded. Anna opened to a familiar page, humming the tune softly first. Then she began to sing, her clear voice filling the cabin with words of hope and redemption. Jed's deep voice joined in tentatively, cracking on the higher notes. But as they repeated the chorus, his confidence grew. Their voices blended, her sweet soprano and his rough bass, creating an unexpected harmony that seemed to warm the very air around them. When the last note faded, they sat in comfortable silence. The stove crackled, sending orange light dancing across the walls. Outside, an owl called, its lonely song drifting through the night. "Thank you," Jed said simply. Anna smiled, carefully closing the hymnal. "For what?" "For bringing music back to this cabin. Been too long since these walls heard anything but silence." She ducked her head, pleased but embarrassed by his words. The journal lay open on the table between them, its pages holding both promise and challenge. Tomorrow they would begin the hard work of gathering proof. But tonight there was warmth and hope and the lingering echo of shared song. The owl called again, answered by its mate. Anna added another log to the stove, watching sparks dance up the chimney. She felt stronger than she had in months, no longer just surviving but preparing to fight back. The day's lessons had left her muscles aching, but her spirit was lifting like the sparks, reaching for something higher, brighter, more hopeful than before. Jed began humming the hymn again as he checked the cabin's doors and windows for the night. His voice might be rough, Anna thought, but it carried the same honest strength as everything else about him. She joined in softly, harmony rising once more into the Lübravashen peaceful evening air. Morning mist clung to the mountain peaks as Jed studied the worn journal pages spread across the cabin's rough-hewn table. His weathered finger traced the careful drawings of boundary markers and creek bends, committing them to memory. "We need help," he said finally. looking up at Anna. "Legal help. And I reckon I know just who might remember your father's dealings." Anna paused in her mending, needle hovering over a torn sleeve. "Who?" "Reverend Cole. He's been riding circuit in these parts nigh on 20 years. Sees more than most, remembers everything." Jed rolled the journal carefully, tucking it into his coat. "We should ride to town, seek his counsel." Anna's fingers tightened on her sewing. "The overseer won't expect us to move open like this," Jed finished. "Besides, church ground is neutral territory, even for his kind." They spent the evening preparing. Anna packed cornbread and dried venison, while Jed cleaned his rifle and checked the mule's shoes. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt purposeful rather than heavy. Dawn painted the sky in pale gold when they set out. Frost sparkled on pine needles, and their breath came in white puffs. The mule picked its way carefully down the mountain trail, bearing both riders and their meager supplies. Anna sat behind Jed, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The steady sway of the mule's gait and Jed's solid presence before her helped calm her racing thoughts. Still, each cracking twig made her start, imagining the overseer's men lying in wait. They traveled all day, stopping only to rest the mule and share their simple provisions. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Elk Creek's church spire came into view, its weathered cross standing stark against darkening clouds. The parsonage sat behind the church, a modest cabin with lamplight glowing in its windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the promise of warmth and welcome. Jed helped Anna down from the mule, her legs stiff from the long ride. Before they could knock, the door opened. Reverend Cole stood silhouetted in the lamplight, his silver hair gleaming. Despite his advanced years, he stood straight as a pine tree, his eyes sharp and kind beneath bushy brows. "Jedediah Harper," he said warmly. "Been wondering when you'd bring your guest to visit." He turned to Anna with a gentle smile. "Welcome, child. Sarah's just putting supper on." Anna blinked back sudden tears at his kind tone. It had been so long since anyone but Jed had spoken to her with simple human dignity. Inside, the parsonage was humble but homey. Rag rugs softened the wooden floor, and dried herbs hung from the rafters. Sarah Cole, the preacher's wife, bustled forward to take their coats, her round face creased with welcome. "Sit, sit," she urged, gesturing to chairs near the crackling hearth. "You both look fair frozen through." Once they'd warmed themselves, Jed produced the journal. "Reverend, we need your help. There's a matter of justice needs settling." The old preacher settled into his chair, acceptance in his weathered face. "Tell me." Anna's voice trembled at first as she began her story. Her father's sudden death, the overseer's appearance with claims of debt, the forged documents that stripped away her inheritance. But as she spoke, strength crept into her words. Reverend Cole listened intently, his expression growing grave. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I remember your father well," he said finally. "James Miller was a good man, honest as sunrise. I witnessed him signing those original deed papers myself, right here in this very room." He looked up, steel in his gentle eyes, "and I'll swear to that in any court." Sarah touched her husband's shoulder. "Supper's ready, if you'll all come to table." Anna rose to help, following Sarah to the kitchen. Together they carried steaming bowls of bean soup and a loaf of fresh bread to the table. The simple tasks of serving and sharing food felt like a balm to Anna's spirit, after years of eating alone in corners, treated like less than human. "Thank you," she whispered to Sarah as they worked. "For everything." The older woman's eyes crinkled with understanding. She squeezed Anna's hand briefly before turning back to her tasks. Over supper, they discussed strategy. The Reverend knew which judge might give them fair hearing, which clerk could search old records. Jed contributed his knowledge of the overseer's past schemes in other mining camps. "We'll need to move careful," the Reverend cautioned. "Briggs has friends in high places, bought with other people's gold." Night had fallen fully by the time they finished their planning. Sarah insisted on sending them off with extra bread and cheese, tucked carefully into Anna's satchel. "You'll sleep in the church loft," Reverend Cole decided. "Safer than here. Fewer windows, better view of the street." He pressed a key into Jed's hand. Lord's house is always open to those seeking justice. The church interior was hushed and cool, smelling of beeswax and old hymnals. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as they climbed to the loft. Moonlight filtered through the high windows, casting silver patterns on the rough planks. Anna spread their blankets while Jed checked the loft's vantage points. Finally satisfied, he settled near the window, rifle across his lap. "Try to sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch." Anna lay down, pulling her blanket close. The church's familiar scents and peaceful silence wrapped around her like a prayer shawl. After so many years of harsh words and cruel hands, the simple kindness she'd found today seemed almost too much to bear. "I never thought I'd see honest folk stand with me again," she whispered into the darkness. Jed's voice came back gruff but gentle. "Some still do." Anna closed her eyes, feeling safer than she had since her father died. The soft creak of wooden beams and Jed's steady presence nearby lulled her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for these good people who'd chosen to help bear her burden. Through the night, Jed kept his vigil by the window. His keen eyes scanned the moonlit street below, watching for any sign of the overseer's hired men. But only the usual night sounds reached him. The distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind in the church eaves, and Anna's peaceful breathing as she slept. His rifle remained ready across his lap, a solid promise of protection. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight at least, justice had found allies, and hope had found shelter in the house of God. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Jed and Anna rode into Elk Creek. The courthouse bell tolled 7 times, its deep bronze notes echoing across the quiet streets. A week of preparation had led to this moment. Anna sat straight in the saddle despite her trembling hands, her best dress carefully mended and pressed. "Remember," Jed murmured as they dismounted, "truth's on our side." The courthouse, a squat wooden building with peeling white paint, already drew a crowd. Townsfolk clustered on the steps, their breath visible in the crisp air. Some nodded to Jed, while others turned away, whispering behind gloved hands. Anna kept close to his side as they climbed the worn steps. Inside, lamplight fought the morning shadows. The single room smelled of wood smoke and anxiety. Wooden benches, scarred by years of shifting bodies, filled quickly as people filed in. At the front, a heavy desk served as the judge's bench, with smaller tables for opposing parties. Overseer Briggs already occupied one table, his expensive coat a stark contrast to the rough-hewn surroundings. His quick eyes followed Anna's entrance, his mouth twisting into a familiar sneer. Beside him sat a sharp-featured lawyer from Denver, papers spread before them like a fortress. "Don't look at him," Jed whispered, guiding Anna to their table. "He's got no power over you now." Reverend Cole waited for them, his Bible and a leather folder on the table. His calm presence steadied Anna's nerves as she took her seat. The preacher's wife had found space in the front row, her encouraging smile a warm beacon in the tense room. Judge Harrison entered from a side door, his black robes rustling. Though elderly, he carried himself with dignity, his gray eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. The room rose, then settled at his gesture. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced, his voice carrying to the rafters. "The matter of Miller land claims and indenture papers." The overseer's lawyer rose first, presenting their case with practiced smoothness. He displayed documents showing Anna's father's supposed debts, contracts bearing James Miller's signature, and papers transferring the Creek property to Briggs in payment. "As you can see, Your Honor," the lawyer concluded, "everything is properly signed and witnessed. The girl's indenture was legal compensation for outstanding debts." Anna's hands clenched in her lap as Briggs nodded in false sympathy. She knew those signatures were forged, but how could they prove it? Jed stood next, his voice steady despite his usual discomfort with public speaking. He described finding Anna at auction, the suspicious circumstances of her indenture, and the discovery of her father's journal with its record of mineral rights. "Your Honor," he said, "I call Reverend Cole to testify about the original deed signing." The old preacher approached the bench, Bible in hand. After swearing his oath, he spoke with quiet certainty about witnessing James Miller sign the original Creek property deeds. "I remember it clear as yesterday," Reverend Cole testified. "James was proud of securing that land for his daughter's future. He paid cash money for it, every penny honest and counted twice." Briggs shifted uncomfortably as the Reverend continued, describing details of that day, the ink, color, the placement of signatures, even the weather. His precise memory carried the ring of truth. "And there's someone else who can speak to this matter," Reverend Cole added. "With the court's permission, I've asked Henry Red Elk to testify." A murmur rippled through the courthouse as the door opened. Henry Red Elk entered, his dignified bearing drawing all eyes. The elderly Ute scout moved with quiet grace, his weather-worn face impassive as he took the oath. "I guided James Miller when he first surveyed that creek land," Henry stated, his voice soft but clear. "We spent 3 days marking boundaries, testing water rights. He spoke often of his daughter Anna, how this land would be her security." The scout's dark eyes found Anna's face. "I remember you as a small one, playing by the creek while your father worked. He built cairns at each corner of the property. They stand there still, though now half hidden by brush." Briggs leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer. The sharp-featured man rose quickly. "Your Honor, I object to this unusual witness." Judge Harrison's bushy eyebrows drew together. "On what grounds?" "Well, the lawyer faltered, aware of the dangerous territory he approached. "Henry Red Elk has testified in this court before," the judge stated firmly. "His word has proven reliable. Objection overruled." Henry continued, describing in detail the creek's mineral deposits and the careful way James Miller had documented everything. His testimony aligned perfectly with the journal entries Anna had found. When Henry finished, Judge Harrison called for the disputed documents. He examined them carefully, holding papers to the light, comparing signatures. The courthouse remained silent, except for the crack of the wood stove and the shuffle of paper. Finally, the judge looked up, his expression grave. "I find significant discrepancies between these signatures. Moreover, the witnesses listed on these debt documents cannot be located, while Reverend Cole and Henry Red Elk provide clear, credible testimony about the original land purchase." He straightened in his chair. "It is the finding of this court that the mineral rights and creek property rightfully belong to Anna Miller. Furthermore, any indenture based on fraudulent claims is hereby dissolved." The words took a moment to sink in. Anna sat frozen, until Sarah Cole's quiet "Praise be" broke the silence. Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks as she gripped Jed's arm, hardly daring to believe. Briggs shot to his feet, his face mottled with rage. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal to Denver." "You'll do no such thing," Judge Harrison said coldly. "Unless you'd like me to examine other contracts you've handled. I understand there are several former miners with interesting stories to tell." The overseer's face went pale. Without another word, he snatched his coat and stormed from the courthouse, his lawyer hurrying behind. People began to move, some offering congratulations, others slipping away. Henry Red Elk approached Anna, his gentle eyes warming with approval. "Your father was an honest man," he said simply. "Now justice is done." He touched her shoulder lightly, then walked away with the same quiet dignity he'd entered with. The ride back to the cabin felt dreamlike. Late afternoon sun painted the snow in shades of gold and rose. Anna's heart felt as light as the scattered snowflakes dancing in their wake. Inside the cabin, warmth welcomed them home. Jed built up the fire while Anna mixed cornbread batter, her movements sure and peaceful. For the first time, she felt truly at home here, no longer a rescued stranger but a woman with rights and purpose. They shared the evening meal in comfortable companionship, the cornbread steaming as they broke it apart. Jed watched Anna's face in the lamplight, seeing joy replace the haunted look she'd worn so long. "I never thought I'd see this day," Anna said softly. "My land restored, my freedom given back." She looked at Jed, her eyes bright. "And none of it would have happened without you." Jed ducked his head, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Weren't right. What was done to you? Simple as that." Anna reached across the table, touching his scarred hand. "Not simple at all. You risked everything for a stranger." "Not a stranger now," Jed replied gruffly. Their eyes met in the warm lamplight, understanding passing between them. They were no longer protector and protected, but two people who had faced injustice together and won. Jed's lonely mountain life had been transformed by Anna's presence, while she had found not just safety but true companionship. Laughter came easily that evening as they recalled the overseer's hasty departure and the judge's stern warning. Even Jed's usual reserve melted as Anna mimicked Briggs's indignant spluttering. The fire crackled peacefully, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, an owl called softly in the gathering dusk. Inside the cabin, hope bloomed as bright as the lamplight between them. "What will you do with the land?" Jed asked as they cleared the supper dishes. Anna stood thoughtfully by the window, gazing out at the starlit snow. "Work it proper, like Pa intended. Maybe see about hiring some honest miners to help." She turned to him, smiling. "I'll need advice from someone who knows the mountain ways." Jed nodded, understanding her unspoken invitation. The lonely days were behind them both now. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. They sat by the fire late into the evening, sharing dreams and plans. The cabin rang with quiet laughter and warm conversation, no longer shadowed by fear. For this one perfect night, happiness reigned complete in their mountain home. The warmth of their victory slowly faded with the setting Sunday. Inside the cabin, contentment settled over them like a familiar quilt. Anna hummed softly as she tidied away their supper dishes, each movement speaking of belonging. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet as she moved about, straightening blankets and arranging kindling for morning. Jed sat in his usual spot by the fire, the steady rhythm of stone against steel marking his progress as he sharpened their tools. Sparks scattered from his whetstone, tiny points of light dancing in the dimness. The familiar scents of wood, smoke, and pine merged with the metallic tang of his work. "These'll need proper care. Now we've got real work ahead," he commented, testing the edge of an axe blade with his thumb. The tool gleamed in the firelight, its edge keen enough to satisfy even his critical eye. Anna paused in her work, smiling at the way he said, "we." Such a simple word, yet it carried the weight of partnership, of shared purpose. She opened her mouth to respond, but something caught her attention. A shadow passing across the window, too quick to be certain. "Did you see?" she started, but fell silent as another shadow flitted past. Jed's head snapped up, his hands stilling on the whetstone. Years of mountain living had taught him to trust such warnings. The cabin grew deadly quiet, only the pop and crackle of the fire breaking the silence. A sharp smell cut through the wood smoke, kerosene, sharp and chemical. Anna's eyes widened in recognition, just as liquid splashed against the window, running down in ugly streams. "Jed," she cried, but he was already moving, grabbing her arm with one hand and snatching up his rifle with the other. The first flames roared up the outside wall with frightening speed, turning the window into a frame of fire. Orange light flooded the cabin as more flames licked up the log walls, hungry tongues seeking every crack and crevice. "Out! Now!" Jed commanded, pushing Anna toward the door. Heat pressed against them as he yanked it open, revealing more flames climbing the porch posts. Beyond the fire's glare, dark figures scattered into the night. The overseer's men fleeing their handiwork. Anna screamed, as burning debris fell from the roof, forcing them to dodge. Jed wrapped her in his arms, half carrying her down the porch steps into the biting cold. Snow crunched under their boots as they stumbled to safety. The contrasts assaulted their senses, intense heat on their faces, frozen snow at their feet, the roar of flames and the dead silence of the winter night. Jed disappeared briefly into the inferno, emerging with an armful of blankets from the chest near the door. He wrapped them around Anna's shaking shoulders, sheltering her from both cold and horror. They could only watch as the fire devoured their home. Flames shot skyward, carrying sparks like evil stars into the black night. The heat drove them further back, until they stood at the edge of the clearing. Anna's tears froze on her cheeks as she clutched Jed's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Everything," she whispered. "Everything we built." The crackle of approaching horses announced their neighbor's arrival. The Johnsons from down the ridge had seen the glow and come to help, but it was far too late. The cabin was fully engulfed, flames shooting from every window. Tom Johnson shook his head grimly. Nothing to be done now, except let it burn out. His wife Sarah pressed a flask of coffee into Anna's trembling hands. "Lord have mercy," Sarah murmured, watching the flames consume what had become Anna's first true home since her father's death. More neighbors arrived, drawn by the fire's glow, but none could offer more than silent witness to the destruction. The heat drove even the night birds away, leaving only the roar of flames and the occasional crash of falling timbers. "You'll stay with us tonight," Tom Johnson declared, but his wife interrupted. "The barn would be better," Sarah said quietly. Them that did this might come looking to finish what they started. The barn's hidden better, and warm enough with fresh hay. Jed nodded, knowing she was right. They couldn't risk bringing danger to another family's doorstep. The barn would have to do until they could make better plans. The Johnsons led them to their barn, a solid structure tucked into a stand of pine trees. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horses offered small comfort. Sarah brought them more blankets and promised to return at first light with food and coffee. Alone in the barn, Anna finally broke down completely. Her sobs echoed in the rafters as she curled into herself, shoulders shaking with grief and guilt. "It's my fault," she choked out between tears. "If you hadn't helped me, hadn't taken me in, your home would still be standing. Everything you owned." "Stop that talk," Jed said roughly, though his own heart was heavy with loss. "Ain't your fault what evil men do." But Anna couldn't be consoled. "You lost everything because of me. Your home, your peace." Her voice cracked. "Maybe God's punishing me for bringing trouble to your door." Jed said nothing, his eyes fixed on the stars visible through gaps in the roof. The same stars he'd watched through his cabin window for so many years, now witness to another loss. First his family to fever, then his younger years to war, now his home to flames. Each time he'd built something worth having, it seemed the Lord saw fit to strip it away. The night grew colder, their breath frosting in the air. Anna's sobs gradually quieted to silent tears, though her body still trembled beneath the blankets. Jed remained motionless, his scarred hand resting on his rifle, keeping watch through the long hours. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, sensing the tension in their unexpected guests. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo their desolation. The moon cast silver shadows through the roof boards, painting stripes across the hay-strewn floor. Anna finally spoke again, her voice small in the darkness. "What do we do now?" Jed had no answer. For the first time since finding her on that auction block, he felt truly lost. Their victory in court seemed hollow now, mocked by the ashes of their home. The overseer had taken everything except their lives, and Jed wasn't certain he wouldn't try for those too, given another chance. The night stretched endless before them, each hour marked by Anna's quiet weeping and Jed's silent vigil. Neither found sleep, both haunted by the memory of flames against the snow and the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, their enemies were celebrating their handiwork. Dawn would eventually come, bringing with it the need for decisions and action. But for now, they could only endure the night, each lost in private grief for all they had gained, and lost in such a short span of time. Through gaps in the barn roof, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering. Jed watched them move across the sky, remembering other nights of loss and wondering if, this time, God had finally turned his face away for good. Morning crept over the mountains, pale light seeping through the weathered slats of the Johnsons' barn. Anna stirred from her fitful doze, every muscle aching from sleeping upright in the hay. The events of the previous night crashed back into her mind. The flames, the destruction, the crushing weight of loss. Jed was already awake, or perhaps had never slept. He stood at the barn door, his expression carved from stone as he watched the sun rise. Without a word, he moved to where their mule dozed in one of the stalls, beginning to saddle the animal with efficient movements that spoke of decades of practice. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Anna watched him work, her heart twisting. Everything he'd built, everything he'd offered her, all of it lay in ashes because he'd chosen to help her. The weight of that knowledge pressed down until she couldn't bear it any longer. "I should go," she said softly, her voice rough from crying. "Leave before I bring more trouble down on Placed any longer. You." Jed's hands stilled on the leather straps. He turned to face her, his eyes hard beneath his graying brows. "No, but they'll keep coming after me. They've already taken your home. We fight together." He cut her off, his voice as rough as creek stones. "Or not at all." He cinched the last strap with finality. "That's how it's gonna be." The declaration left no room for argument. Anna blinked back fresh tears, overwhelmed by his stubborn loyalty. She helped him gather what little they had left. A few blankets, his rifle, her father's journal safely tucked in her pocket. Sarah Johnson appeared with a basket of biscuits and coffee, her kind face creased with concern. "You sure you won't stay longer?" Much obliged, Jed replied. But we need to see what's left. Make plans. They mounted up, Anna behind Jed on the mule, and headed toward Elk Creek. The morning air was crisp and clean, but Anna could still smell smoke in their clothes, a bitter reminder clinging to every thread. The town came into view as the sun climbed higher. Even from a distance, Anna could see people stopping to stare, could imagine the whispers starting. News of the fire would have spread like wind through dry grass. As they rode down the main street, the whispers became audible. Some voices held pity. Poor souls, lost everything. Others carried poison. Serves them right, taking up with trouble. Anna kept her head high, though each barbed word stung like sleet against her face. Jed guided the mule to the mercantile, helping Anna down before tying the reins to the hitching post. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather, lamplight gleaming off rows of tin cans and glass jars. Anna moved quietly through the aisles, gathering basic supplies, flour, salt, the bare necessities to start again. Meanwhile, Jed collected nails, canvas, and tools, his jaw set in determination. Every item he added to the counter was a statement. They would rebuild, no matter what. As Anna approached, the counter with her meager selections, Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, stepped forward. The woman had never spoken directly to Anna before, had been one of many who looked away that day on the auction block. But now she reached beneath the counter and pulled out a length of sturdy fabric, blue as summer sky. Here, she whispered, pressing it into Anna's hands, for a fresh start. Her eyes held something like shame, or perhaps awakening conscience. Anna's throat tightened. Thank you, she managed, the simple kindness nearly undoing her composure. Mrs. Peterson squeezed her hand once, then turned away quickly. Jed paid for their supplies with coins that seemed to pain him to part with. Funds that should have gone to winter stores, now needed for basic shelter. As they stepped back outside, Anna noticed his shoulders tense. Following his gaze, she saw them, 3 men lounging outside the saloon, watching with predatory intent. The overseer's hired muscle, no doubt waiting to report their movements. Without a word, Jed helped Anna mount up, secured their purchases, and led them out of town at a pace just short of suspicious haste. They didn't slow until Elk Creek disappeared behind them. The journey back to the cabin, ruins seemed longer, each familiar landmark a reminder of what they'd lost. When they finally reached the clearing, the destruction was stark in daylight. Blackened logs thrust up like broken teeth, ash coating the snow in gray death. The stone chimney stood alone, a monument to what had been. Jed worked silently, efficiently, setting up the canvas between trees to create temporary shelter. Anna gathered what she could salvage from the ruins. A few cast iron pans, miraculously intact, some tools that had survived the heat. Each item felt like a small victory against destruction. As dusk approached, they huddled under the canvas. Anna had managed to build a small fire, over which she heated beans in one of the rescued pans. The meal was simple, but hot food helped push back the creeping cold. Night settled around them, stars pricking through the canvas above. The same stars that had witnessed their loss now watched their first attempts at recovery. Anna felt the weight of it all, the destruction, the kindness of Mrs. Peterson, the threat still lurking in town, Jed's unwavering loyalty. Pressing down until she had to speak or break, she began to pray aloud, her voice soft but steady. Lord, we need your strength now. Evil men took our shelter, but they can't take our faith. Help us rebuild, not just walls and roof, but hope. And thank you for good people who still show kindness, even when it's hard. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Jed's head bow slightly. His hands, rough from years of work, clasped together in his lap. He didn't speak, but something in his rigid posture softened, as if her words had touched a long-buried ember of faith in his own heart. The prayer hung in the air between them, a fragile thread of hope in the darkness. Wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, they had shelter, food, and most importantly, the will to continue. Anna watched Jed add wood to their small fire, his movements deliberate and careful. She recognized in him now what she hadn't seen before, not just strength and determination, but a deep, wounded faith beginning to stir again. Her prayers seemed to reach past his gruff exterior, touching something he'd thought long dead. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canvas above them, a poor echo of the home they'd lost, but a shelter nonetheless. Together they sat in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts, but bound by shared purpose and growing faith. Outside their canvas haven, the night deepened, but inside, something was rekindling, not just their fire, but the spark of belief that good could still triumph over evil. That loss wasn't the end of the story. In the quiet hours, that spark grew stronger, fed by Anna's steady faith and Jed's grudging acceptance that perhaps God hadn't abandoned them after all. Dawn broke cold and clear over the ruins of Jed's cabin. Anna stood beside him, surveying the blackened logs that had once been their shelter. Her shoulders squared with determination as she picked up a saw. "I can help," she insisted, though her hands were still tender from blisters. Jed frowned at her wrapped palms but nodded slowly. "Reckon we need every hand we can get." They worked through the morning, cutting away charred sections of timber. Anna's arms trembled with the effort, but she refused to stop. Jed watched her from the corner of his eye, concern warring with respect on his weathered face. By midday, they had sorted the salvageable logs from those too damaged to use. Jed showed Anna how to strip away the burnt portions, revealing good wood beneath. The work was slow, but steady. Their shared silence was comfortable now, broken only by the rasp of tools and the occasional grunt of effort. As the sun climbed higher, the crunch of wagon wheels made them both look up. Tom Wilson, a farmer from down the valley, pulled his team to a stop before the ruins. He climbed down holding a burlap sack. "Brought you folks some nails," he said gruffly. "Reckon you could use 'em." Jed straightened, surprise flickering across his features. "Much obliged, Tom." The farmer nodded, then hesitated. "Mary sent along some bread, too." He set both offerings on a nearby stump. "If you need more hands." "We'll holler," Jed assured him. After Tom left, Anna touched the sack of nails reverently. "I didn't expect." She trailed off, emotion thick in her voice. "Good people still exist," Jed said quietly. "Sometimes they just need reminding." They worked until sunset, the lantern's glow casting long shadows as they continued hammering planks into place. Anna's hands ached, but pride bloomed in her chest at each board secured. The skeleton of walls began to take shape, promise rising from ashes. The next morning brought Sarah Miller and her husband, leading a spotted piglet on a rope. "Can't have a proper home without some livestock," Sarah declared, her kind face determined. "She's the runt, but she'll grow strong." Anna knelt to scratch the piglet's ears, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Throughout the day, more neighbors appeared. The Mackenzie boys brought fresh-cut timber. Old Widow Jenkins arrived with a box of dishes she claimed she never used. Each gift, no matter how small, built something more than just a cabin. It built hope. Jed accepted each offering with gruff thanks, clearly uncomfortable with charity but moved by the generosity. Anna watched him struggle with his pride, saw how each kindness chipped away at his protective shell. As dusk approached on the third day, Anna gathered herself near their makeshift cooking fire. She had saved a bit of flour from their supplies, determined to create something special. Working carefully with limited ingredients, she mixed biscuits, setting them to bake over the hot coals. The smell drew Jed from where he'd been measuring boards. He watched curiously as she pulled the slightly blackened biscuits from the fire. "They're a bit burnt," she admitted, laughing softly. "But they're warm." Jed took one, inspecting the charred bottom with raised eyebrows. When he bit into it, a surprising sound escaped him. A low, rusty chuckle. "Reckon I've had worse." Anna's own laughter joined his, the sound rising into the evening air like a prayer of thanksgiving. For a moment, the weight of their struggles lifted, replaced by simple joy in sharing burnt biscuits and honest laughter. Their peace was short-lived. As they finished eating, hoofbeats approached through the gathering darkness. Both tensed, but it was only young Billy Thompson, one of the Reverend's sons, riding hard. "Mr. Harper," he called, pulling his horse to a stop. "Pa sent me to warn you. The overseer's been making threats in town." Jed stood slowly, his face hardening. "What kind of threats?" "Says Miss Anna's claim ain't worth the paper it's printed on without his consent. Says he's got papers proving she's still bound to him." Billy shifted uncomfortably. "He's been drinking heavy, talking about settling scores." Anna saw the change come over Jed, saw his hands clench. his jaw tightened. Rage rolled off him in waves as he stared toward town. "No," she said firmly, grabbing his arm. "Please, Jed. No bloodshed." He turned to her, his eyes dark with fury. "That snake he needs justice, not violence," Anna insisted. "We've come too far to lose everything to vengeance now." The muscles in Jed's jaw worked as he struggled with himself. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "I promise to hold my temper," he said roughly. "But if he comes here, then we'll face him together," Anna finished, "with the law on our side." After Billy rode away, they sat beside their half-built hearth. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking through the branches above. Anna began to hum softly, an old hymn her father had taught her, about peace in troubled times. To her surprise, Jed's deep voice joined hers, uncertain at first, then stronger. The melody wove through the darkness, a thread of comfort binding them together. Around them, the new walls rose, not just shelter but sanctuary. Built by their own hands and the kindness of neighbors, the piglet snuffled in her makeshift pen, settling down for the night. Tools lay ready for tomorrow's work. Above them, the moon sailed through scattered clouds, casting silver light on the fresh-cut timber that would soon become their home. Anna's voice faded into silence, but peace remained. She studied the half-finished walls, seeing not what was missing, but what had already been accomplished. Each nail, each board, each helping hand was a victory over destruction. Jed stoked the fire, his movements deliberate and controlled. The rage had eased from his shoulders, replaced by quiet determination. His promise to avoid violence hung between them, a testament to how far they'd come from those first days of wary trust. The flames cast dancing shadows on the new walls, promising warmth and shelter to come. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, perhaps more threats. But tonight, they had this moment of harmony, of shared purpose, of community supporting them despite all odds. Around them, the night deepened. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and wood smoke. Their work was far from finished, but foundations had been laid, not just of logs and nails, but of trust, faith, and the strength to face whatever came next together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the half-rebuilt cabin when hoofbeats approached through the crusty snow. Anna looked up from where she was hanging wet laundry, her hands red from the cold water. Jed paused in his work, setting down his hammer as a rider appeared. The courier wore the dusty clothes of long travel, his horse breathing hard in the cold air. "Miss Anna May?" he called, pulling a leather message pouch from his saddle. "That's me," Anna said softly, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped forward. The man produced an official-looking envelope, sealed with wax bearing the railroad company's stamp. "From the Western Pacific Railroad Agency, ma'am." They asked for confirmation of delivery. Anna's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the letter. Jed moved closer, protective instinct clear in his stance. They watched the courier ride away before Anna carefully broke the seal. Her eyes widened as she read, color rising in her cheeks. "The railroad," she whispered. "They want to negotiate rights to the creek land. They acknowledge me as the rightful heir." Jed took the letter when she held it out, his weathered fingers gentle with the crisp paper. His eyes narrowed as he studied the formal language. "Says here they're offering fair market value," he noted gruffly. Anna pressed her hands to her chest, hardly daring to breathe. Could it really be true? After everything? "Railroad companies don't waste time on false claims," Jed said. "They've done their research." He folded the letter carefully, handed it back. "Says they want to meet in 2 days at their agency office." Hope bloomed in Anna's chest, but anxiety followed close behind. "The overseer," she said quietly. "He'll try to stop this, won't he?" Jed's jaw tightened. "Likely. But the railroad's word carries weight, more than his threats." They spent the rest of that day working with renewed energy, though Anna caught herself pausing occasionally to touch the letter in her pocket, reassuring herself it was real. The walls of their cabin rose steadily, each board a promise of permanence. 2 days later, they rose before dawn. Anna dressed in her best dress, carefully mended but still showing signs of wear. Jed wore a clean shirt and his least worn coat, They ate a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee before saddling up. The ride to town was quiet, broken only by the crunch of snow under hooves and the occasional cry of a winter bird. Anna's thoughts tumbled between hope and fear as the buildings of Elk Creek came into view. The railroad agency office occupied a new building near the telegraph office, its fresh paint standing out against the weathered structures around it. Several horses were already hitched outside. Anna's stomach tightened as Jed helped her down from the mule. Inside, clerks in neat suits looked up from their desks. The office smelled of ink and fresh paper. A young man approached, introducing himself as Mr. Phillips, the railroad's land agent. "Miss May," he said respectfully, gesturing to a private office. "We've reviewed your claim thoroughly. Please, come in." The next hour passed in a blur of documents and discussions. The agent explained the railroad's plans for a spur line along the creek, the need for water rights, the value of mineral deposits. Numbers were mentioned that made Anna's head spin. She found herself trembling, overwhelmed by the formality and importance of it all. Her eyes sought Jed's. He sat quietly beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "Take your time, Miss May." "Mr. Phillips said kindly, noting her uncertainty. "These are significant decisions." Jed cleared his throat. "Might be wise to review everything careful. Like," he suggested. "Sleep on it some." Anna nodded gratefully. "Yes," she managed. "I'd like time to consider." The agent agreed readily, providing copies of the offers for their review. As they emerged from the office, Anna was startled to see a crowd had gathered outside. Townsfolk lined the street, watching and whispering. But something had changed. Some faces that had once shown only scorn now held respect. Several men touched their hats as Anna passed. Mrs. Wilson, the baker's wife, actually smiled and nodded. Others still glared, particularly the overseer's known associates clustered near the saloon. Their hostile stares followed Anna and Jed as they mounted up and rode out of town. The sun was setting by the time they reached their half-built home. Anna built up the fire while Jed tended to the animals. The piglet, growing quickly, squealed for her dinner. Over a simple supper of beans and salt pork, they spread out the railroad documents on a rough plank table. The lantern light flickered across pages dense with legal language and carefully drawn maps. "It's more money than I ever dreamed of," Anna said softly. "Enough to rebuild properly, to buy good stock." She paused, looking around at the walls they'd raised together. "But this land was my father's dream. Selling it feels." "Ain't selling all of it," Jed reminded her. "Just rights to part. You'd still own the rest." Anna nodded slowly. "You're right." She straightened her shoulders, a new confidence in her voice. "And I don't care what people in town whisper anymore. What matters is the truth, and that God's justice has finally come." Jed's rough hand covered hers where it rested on the documents. The warmth of his calloused palm sent a flutter through her chest. His eyes held something deeper than mere approval when they met hers. A knock at the door startled them both. Jed's hand went to his rifle, but Anna recognized the familiar pattern. 3 quick raps, the way Reverend Cole always announced himself. The preacher's face was grave when they opened the door. Snow dusted his shoulders and hat. "Evening, folks. Afraid I bring troubling news." Anna's heart sank as she invited him in, offering him a seat by the fire. The Reverend removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "The overseer's been drinking heavy at the saloon," he said without preamble, "making threats. Says he'll settle things once and for all at Sunday service." "At church?" Anna whispered, horrified. The Reverend nodded grimly. "Claims he'll prove to everyone you're still bound to him. Says he has documents that'll override even the railroad's claim." Jed's face darkened. "He's tried that before. Failed then, he'll fail now." "Perhaps," Reverend Cole agreed. "But he's a desperate man, and desperate men are dangerous." He looked at Anna kindly. "I won't cancel service. That would let fear win. But you should know what's coming." After the Reverend left, Anna stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall in the darkness. The railroad's documents lay on the table behind her, promise and peril bound together in ink and paper. "We don't have to go Sunday," Jed said quietly. Anna turned to him, moonlight silvering her face. "Yes, we do," she replied. I won't hide from him anymore. Whatever he plans, we'll face it together." Jed nodded slowly, pride and concern warring in his expression. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the half-finished walls. But, inside, the fire burned steady and warm, like the courage growing in Anna's heart. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the winter sun casting long shadows across fresh snow. Inside the half-rebuilt cabin, Anna stood before a cracked mirror, smoothing her hands over the calico dress, the unexpected gift from the mercantile wife. She'd spent evenings carefully mending its few worn spots, and now the blue and white pattern seemed to glow in the early light. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned her hair back, trying to make herself presentable for church. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavy on her heart, but she refused to let fear win. "Not today. You look right fine." Jed's gruff voice came from behind her. She turned to find him awkwardly polishing his boots with an old rag, his Sunday best hanging somewhat loose on his frame. "Thank you," she whispered, touched by his effort to dress properly. His beard was neatly trimmed, and he'd even attempted to tame his wild hair. They shared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee, neither speaking much. The morning silence was broken only by the crack of kindling in the stove and the occasional whinny from the mule outside. "We don't have to do this," Jed said finally, his scarred hand gripping his coffee cup tight. "Could wait another week." Anna shook her head firmly. "No more waiting. No more hiding." She stood, gathering their dishes. "Whatever the overseer plans, we face it today." Jed nodded slowly, respect evident in his eyes. They finished their preparations in companionable quiet, Anna wrapping the remaining cornbread for later, Jed checking his rifle before stowing it in its saddle holster. The ride into town was cold but clear, their breath frosting in the morning air. Anna sat straight in her saddle, chin lifted, though her heart fluttered with each step closer to Elk Creek. Jed rode beside her, a solid presence that helped steady her nerves. As they approached the small white church, Anna could see carriages and horses already gathered. Townsfolk in their Sunday finest climbed the steps, some pausing to stare as Jed helped Anna down from her mount. "Remember," Jed murmured as they reached the church steps, "you ain't alone." Inside, the wooden pews were filling quickly. Sunlight streamed through frosted windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The familiar scent of pine boughs and lamp oil wrapped around them as they found seats near the middle. Whispers followed their entrance, some hostile, others merely curious. Anna kept her eyes forward, focused on the rough-hewn cross hanging above the pulpit. Beside her, Jed's jaw was set, his shoulders tense. Reverend Cole stood at the front, greeting late arrivers with quiet nods. His weathered face showed concern as he checked his pocket watch, then the door, clearly anticipating trouble. The congregation's murmuring grew suddenly louder. Anna's heart clenched as heavy boots thundered on the church steps. The door burst open, winter air swirling in with Samuel Briggs, the overseer. His face was flushed, whether from drink or rage was hard to tell. Papers crumpled in his fist as he stormed down the center aisle, several of his men following close behind. "This is a house of God," Reverend Cole's firm voice cut through the growing noise. "You'll conduct yourself accordingly." The overseer sneered, waving his documents. "Then let God witness this fraud." He jabbed a finger toward Anna. "Her claim is worthless. I have proof papers showing she's still bound to me by law." The congregation erupted in shocked whispers. Anna felt Jed tensing beside her, his hands curling into fists. Without thinking, she reached over, gripping his rough fingers in hers. "Mercy," she whispered, though her own heart raced with fear and anger. "Please." Jed's hand relaxed slightly in hers, but his eyes still burned as they fixed on the overseer. "Enough." Reverend Cole's voice cracked like thunder through the church. "If you have legitimate business here, Samuel Briggs, we'll handle it proper and under God's eye." He gestured to the front. "Come forward. Place your hand on the Bible. Swear your claims are true." The overseer's swagger faltered slightly. Several townsfolk who'd witnessed Anna's father's original land signing sat forward, their faces stern. I ain't here to play church games," Briggs blustered, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "No games," Reverend Cole said firmly. "Simple truth before God and these witnesses. Swear your documents are genuine. Swear you came by them honestly." Silence fell heavy in the church. Anna could hear her own heart pounding as the overseer stood frozen, papers crumpling further in his white-knuckled grip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. His eyes darted around the church, finding no friendly faces. Even his own men looked uncomfortable. He started, then stopped. His gaze fell on the Bible waiting on the pulpit, then shifted to the witnesses who'd known Anna's father. The fight seemed to drain from him suddenly, leaving him looking older and somehow smaller. "The papers," he said hoarsely, "might not be entirely proper." A gasp rippled through the congregation. Anna felt tears welling in her eyes as years of fear and shame began to crack. Reverend Cole stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Then make it right, Samuel, here and now, before God and your neighbors." The overseer's shoulders slumped. Slowly, he moved to the pulpit. With shaking hands, he signed a confession and release of claims that the Reverend had ready. Murmurs filled the church as realization spread. Faces that had shown scorn now turned away in shame. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Anna leaned against Jed's solid arm, tears flowing freely now. But these were different tears, not of fear or despair, but of relief and vindication. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly seen. Not as property, not as a burden, but as herself. The overseer stumbled down the aisle and out of the church, his men trailing behind. As the door closed behind them, Reverend Cole raised his hands for quiet. "Let us pray," he said solemnly, "for justice restored, for mercy shown, and for healing to begin." The congregation bowed their heads. Anna felt Jed's rough hand cover hers where it rested on the worn wooden pew. Through her tears, she saw his other hand swipe quickly at his eyes. As the Reverend's prayer filled the sunlit church, Anna felt something shift deep inside her. The chains of fear that had bound her for so long began to fall away, replaced by a newfound strength and peace. When she finally raised her head, she found several townspeople watching her with new eyes. Mrs. Wilson, who'd once turned away in the street, now offered a trembling smile. The banker's wife nodded respectfully. Even the sheriff looked abashed, his hat clutched in his hands. Reverend Cole began the regular service, his voice strong and clear in the morning light. But Anna barely heard the words. She was too aware of Jed's steady presence beside her, of the community slowly shifting around them, of the terrible weight finally lifting from her shoulders. She was free, truly free at last. Not just from legal bondage, but from the burden of shame and fear she'd carried for so long. God's justice had prevailed, not through violence or vengeance, but through truth and mercy. As the congregation joined in singing the first hymn, Anna's voice rose clear and strong, joining with Jed's deeper tones. The music swelled through the small church, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and restored hope. After the final hymn faded, townsfolk lingered in the churchyard. One by one, they approached Anna and Jed, heads bowed in humility. Mr. Peterson, the banker, extended his hand first. "Miss Anna, we were wrong about you, about both of you," he said softly, his grip firm and respectful. Others followed, women who had whispered behind their hands, men who had laughed at the auction block. Each offered quiet words of regret, of hope for better days ahead. Anna accepted their apologies with grace, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply, over and over, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. In the wagon yard, they found an even greater surprise. A small crowd had gathered, loading fresh-cut timber onto wagons. Pine boards and cedar shakes, enough to finish the cabin's roof and walls, were stacked neatly. "Folks pitched in," explained Tom Wilson, adjusting his suspenders. "Figured it was the least we could do." Jed stood silent, his weathered face working with emotion. "I never," he began, then stopped, shaking his head in wonder. Anna touched his arm gently. "God answers in his time," she said, her smile bright in the winter sunshine. The ride home was lighter than any they could remember. Their wagon creaked under its generous load, but their hearts felt unburdened. Jed even chuckled at Anna's story about Mrs. Thompson's wayward chickens, the sound rusty but genuine. Evening found them in their half-rebuilt cabin, the walls now sturdy against the gathering dark. The lamp cast warm shadows as Anna worked bread dough with sure hands, the familiar motions soothing after the day's emotions. At the rough table, Jed's knife moved steadily over a chair leg, shaping the wood with careful attention. Their supper was simple beans, cornbread, and the last of the dried apples, but it tasted like a feast. The warmth between them filled the space more surely than any walls could. When Anna began humming the morning's hymn, her voice clear and sweet, Jed's deeper tones joined in naturally. No longer hesitant, his voice carried the melody with growing confidence. Outside, snow began to fall, each flake catching lamplight through the window. But inside their shelter, built of wood and hope and second chances, the cold couldn't reach them. The cabin, though still unfinished, had never felt more like home. The mountain spring brought new life to the rebuilt cabin. Sturdy pine beams stretched overhead, fresh cut and strong, while the widened stone hearth drew smoke cleanly up through its newly mortared chimney. Each improvement stood as testament to their shared labor and the town's change of heart. Anna knelt in the soft earth beside the cabin, tucking seedlings into neat rows. Her hands, once blistered from unfamiliar work, now moved with confident purpose through the soil. Winter greens sprouted in careful lines, kale, mustard, and hardy spinach that could weather the lingering mountain chill. Inside, Jed's hammer rang steady as he mounted shelves along the wall. Pine boards, sanded smooth and stained golden brown, waited to hold Anna's few precious books, her father's Bible, the hymnal, and volumes gathered since their victory in town. Each shelf represented more than wood and nails. They were promises of permanence, of a future built together. Their days fell into comfortable rhythm. They shared the morning chores without discussion, Anna feeding chickens while Jed split wood, working side by side to draw water or mend fencing. Laughter came easier now, bubbling up over shared jokes or clumsy moments. In the evenings, they bowed their heads together in prayer, their words mixing with the crackle of the fire. One quiet evening, as lamplight cast warm shadows across their supper table, Anna's fingers twisted nervously in her apron. Her voice came soft but sure. "This place," she began, glancing around the cabin. "I love it so. Not for the walls or roof, though they're finer than before." She met Jed's eyes across the table. "I love it because you're here. Because you gave me safety when no one else would." Jed's weathered face softened in the golden light. "And God." Tint, his hand, rough from work but gentle in purpose, reached across to cover hers. "You brought life back to these walls," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Was nothing but silence here before you came. Now there's singing and laughing and—" He swallowed hard. "And hope." Their clasped hands spoke volumes more than words could say. When Anna retired to her bed that night, she felt the rightness of it all settle deep in her bones. She wasn't just seeking shelter anymore, she was home. And in Jed's quiet strength beside her, she had found not just a protector, but a partner for whatever lay ahead. Golden morning light poured through the new windows, catching dust motes that danced above the polished floorboards. The cabin stood complete at last, every beam straight, every joint true. Outside, wagons and horses clustered as neighbors gathered to celebrate the final raising. Anna smoothed her best dress, standing beside Jed at the stone hearth. His presence beside her felt as solid as the cabin's foundation. Through the open door, she could hear children laughing, women setting out covered dishes on makeshift tables, and men discussing the spring planting. Reverend Cole stepped forward, his Bible worn but cherished in his weathered hands. The room hushed as he raised his arms in blessing. "Let this home stand as testament to God's mercy," he intoned, voice carrying to the rafters. "May it remind us that justice flows like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. May all who enter find peace within these walls." The gathering shared a hearty meal together, venison stew, fresh bread, and spring preserves. Stories and laughter flowed freely, healing old wounds with each shared smile. As the sun began to set, folks bid farewell, leaving behind warm wishes and fuller hearts. In the quiet evening, Anna sat in the lamplight, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of the table. She looked up at Jed, who stood warming his hands by the fire. "You bought me once," she said softly, "but it's my choice to stay now." Jed turned, emotion catching in his throat. His calloused hand found hers across the space between them. Then, for the first time since his youth, he bowed his head and prayed aloud. "Lord," he whispered, voice rough with feeling, "thank you for second chances. for mercy I never deserved, for bringing light back to these walls. Outside, stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky above Elk Creek. Inside the cabin, warmth glowed from more than just the hearth. Two souls had found their way home at last. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.